The iron lock clicked shut like the closing of a coffin. Each metallic echo a reminder that Alyssa's world had shrunk to 4 walls and a narrow window. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed her face against the cold glass, watching the capital transform below. Lanterns being lit across the city, blooming like golden fireflies against the twilight. Beyond the rooftops, she could see the palace courtyard filling with nobles. Their silks catching the light, their laughter carrying on the wind like music she'd never be allowed to hear. Behind her door, footsteps faded down the hallway. They're leaving without me. The thought sent something colder than winter through her chest, the familiar ache of being forgotten. Left behind. Again. It had been 5 years since her father remarried Lady Isabel. 5 years since she'd stopped being Lord Carrington's daughter and became simply the girl. 5 years of sleeping in the servants' quarters, eating kitchen scraps, wearing hand-me-downs too worn even for the maids. But tonight was different. Tonight hurt worse. The Moon Festival only happened once every 5 years. She'd been 14 the last time, still her father's precious girl, still allowed at his side. Her mother had been gone only 2 years then, and the wound was fresh enough that he'd held Alyssa's hand through the entire celebration. Whispered promises that they'd weather the grief together. That nothing would change between them. Liar. Through the thin walls, Alyssa could hear her stepsisters Cordelia and Vivian shrieking with laughter as they prepared. Silk rustling against skin. Jewelry clinking like wind chimes. Their mother's voice, smooth as poisoned honey, coaching them on how to angle their faces in candlelight, how to make their laughs sound like music, how to catch a king's eye. The rumor had spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Tonight, after 45 years of mourning his poisoned mate, Alpha-King Hagrid Bearclaw might finally choose again. Remember, daughters, Lady Isabel purred through the walls. A king who's been alone for half a century is a king who's forgotten what it feels like to be wanted. Make him remember. Make him need. Alyssa's stomach twisted. She'd seen the portraits of Lady Marigold in the history books. Ethereal, graceful, beloved by all. How could anyone hope to replace her? How could her stepsisters, beautiful as they were, compete with a ghost? Not that it matters to you, she thought bitterly. You're locked in an attic like the embarrassment you are. It's for your own good, stepdaughter. Lady Isabel's voice earlier had dripped with false concern as she'd personally turned the key. A girl with your questionable bloodline shouldn't be seen at such an important event. Your mother was nobody, after all. A lady-in-waiting with delusions of grandeur. Can't have you tainting your father's reputation. Think of the embarrassment you'd cause him. The words had landed like blows, each one precisely aimed at the wounds that never quite healed. Alyssa had stopped arguing years ago. Stopped defending her mother's memory. What was the point? Her father never contradicted his wife. Never defended Alyssa. He'd learned to look through her, as if by not seeing her, he could pretend she didn't exist. As if her very existence wasn't a reminder of the woman he'd actually loved. Before we dive into Alyssa's story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like button because what's about to unfold will leave you absolutely breathless. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories coming, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when the most powerful Alpha King in the realm takes the hand of the girl everyone tried to destroy. Now, let's see how Alyssa's world is about to change forever. The full moon rose over the eastern mountains, enormous and silver, casting the world in an ethereal glow that made everything look like it belonged in a fairy tale. Somewhere in that palace, the Alpha King was preparing to host the grandest celebration the kingdom had seen in decades. 300 years of peace. 130 years of his rule. And Alyssa was locked in a room that still smelled of the childhood she'd lost. She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching couples arrive in gilded carriages. Women in gowns that cost more than Alyssa had seen in her entire life. Men in formal military dress, their wolf nature barely contained beneath civilized veneers. Everyone who was anyone would be there tonight. Everyone except her. This is your life, she told herself, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. This is all you'll ever be. The forgotten daughter. The servant in noble's clothing. The girl who doesn't belong anywhere. But then, the moonlight streaming through her window changed. It didn't just brighten. It intensified, becoming almost solid, almost tangible, like someone had opened a door in the sky and pure light was pouring through. Alyssa stumbled back from the glass, her heart suddenly pounding. The temperature in the room dropped, and her breath came out in visible clouds. Then she heard it. A voice. Not words exactly. More like a melody without sound, a language she'd never learned but somehow understood in her bones. It whispered through the moonlight like wind through silver bells, and every hair on Alyssa's body stood on end. Come. The command was irresistible. Not because it was forceful, but because every cell in her body wanted to obey. Like the moon itself was calling her home to a place she'd never been but had always belonged. The iron lock clicked. Not from the outside. Not from any key. The mechanism simply released. As if the moon had reached down and undone it with fingers made of light. Alyssa's hand shook as she reached for the door handle. This isn't possible. This isn't. The door swung open. And her reflection in the cracked mirror across the hallway made her gasp. Her threadbare servant's dress, the grey wool thing with patches at the elbows and a hem she'd mended 17 times, was gone. In its place, a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to contain the night sky itself. Silver embroidery traced patterns along the bodice and sleeves, constellations and moon phases stitched in thread that glowed with its own light. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple braid, now fell in waves around her shoulders, woven through with silver ribbons that hadn't been there moments before. She looked like she'd stepped out of a portrait. Like nobility. Like someone who mattered. What's happening to me? The moonlight pulsed brighter, and Alyssa felt it pull at something deep in her chest. A hook behind her ribs, reeling her toward destiny whether she wanted it or not. Her feet moved without conscious thought, carrying her down the hallway, down the servants' stairs, through the kitchen where the remaining staff stared at her with mouths agape. Miss Alyssa? Cook breathed. Is that how did you? But Alyssa couldn't stop. Couldn't explain. She was moving like someone in a dream, pulled by invisible threads toward the palace. Toward the music. Toward something she couldn't name but desperately needed. The streets were empty, everyone already at the festival. She ran through shadows and moonlight, her silk skirts whispering against cobblestones. The palace gates stood open, gold and silver banners streaming in the night breeze. Guards nodded to her as if she belonged there, as if they couldn't see anything strange about a girl in a supernatural gown arriving alone and breathless. The grand hall stretched before her like something from a dream. Massive marble columns rose 3 stories high, draped in white silk and winter roses. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the floor. And everywhere, were wolves in human form. The most powerful, most beautiful, most dangerous people in the kingdom, all gathered in one place. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single piece of ancient oak, sat Alpha-King Hagrid Bearclaw. Even from across the room, his presence was overwhelming. He looked like something carved from legend, tall, broad-shouldered, with long dark hair and a face that managed to be both beautiful and terrifying. He wore black formal wear that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. And when he moved, every eye in the room tracked him like prey watching a predator. Alyssa slipped through the crowd, trying to stay invisible, trying to understand what force had brought her here. The moonlight's pull had faded the moment she'd entered the hall, leaving her alone and confused in a room full of people who would destroy her if they knew who she really was. That's when she saw them. Her stepsisters, positioned near the front of the hall like beautiful pieces of art. Cordelia in rose gold, Vivian in emerald green. Both stunning. both perfectly positioned to catch the king's attention. And between them, Lady Isabel in midnight purple, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd like a general surveying a battlefield. Those eyes found Alyssa. And everything stopped. Lady Isabel's face transformed. Shock first, how did you get here? Then calculation, how do I use this? Then something cold and sharp that Alyssa recognized all too well. The look that meant pain was coming. Guards! Lady Isabel's voice cut through the music like a blade. Guards! There's been a theft. The hall went silent. Every conversation died. Every head turned toward Alyssa. Lady Isabel swept forward, her dress trailing behind her like a purple shadow. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the hall, pitched perfectly for maximum damage. This girl, she declared, pointing at Alyssa with a trembling finger that was pure theater, is my husband's daughter from his first marriage. She works in our household as a servant. By her own choice, I assure you, as we've tried to do right by her despite her humble mother. The pause was deliberate, letting everyone absorb the implication. But tonight, she's stolen from us. That gown belongs to my daughter Cordelia. The jewelry, Lady Isabel gestured at the silver ribbons in Alyssa's hair, are family heirlooms. She's broken into our chambers and dressed herself up like some kind of imposter, someone in the crowd whispered. Thief, said another. How shameless, a noblewoman muttered, loud enough to carry. Alyssa's face burned. Her throat closed. She tried to speak, tried to explain. I don't know how this happened, I don't know where these clothes came from, but no sound would come. I apologize, Your Majesty, Lady Isabel said, turning toward the throne with a deep curtsy. That my stepdaughter would disrupt your celebration with her delusions. She's always been troubled. Fantasies about being more than she is. I'll have her removed immediately. The crowd parted, leaving Alyssa standing alone in the center of the marble floor. 1,000 eyes judged her. 1,000 mouths whispered. She could feel their contempt like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, crushing the air from her lungs. This was worse than being locked away. This was being seen at her absolute lowest, her humiliation witnessed by everyone who mattered. She was going to die right here. Not physically, but something essential would die. The last tiny part of her that had dared to hope she might be worth something. Then the crowd went utterly, completely silent. Not the silence of shock. The silence of prey animals freezing when a predator moves. Alpha-King Hagrid Bearclaw had risen from his throne. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His mere movement commanded attention in a way Alyssa had never witnessed. Every wolf in the room felt it. The weight of his dominance, the ancient power that had kept him ruling for over a century. He descended from the dais with deliberate steps that made the marble floor tremble. Each footfall was measured, controlled, lethal in its precision. His golden eyes, wolf eyes that had never quite returned to human, were fixed on something. On someone. On Alyssa. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. Nobles pressed themselves against walls, baring their throats in instinctive submission. Even Lady Isabel stepped back, her triumph faltering into uncertainty. The king walked across the length of the grand hall. 30 feet. 20. 10. He stopped directly in front of Alyssa. This close, she could see the silver threaded through his dark hair. The lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of ages lived. The way his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped beneath his skin. He smelled like winter wind and ancient pine forests and something wild that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. His hand extended. Palm up. A gesture that was somehow both offering and command. Dance with me. His voice was deep enough to resonate in her chest. Not a request. Not a question. A claim. The entire hall held its breath. And Alyssa, trembling with shame and confusion and something that felt disturbingly like hope, placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, the moonlight streaming through the tall windows flared bright as lightning, and somewhere in the distance, Elissa could have sworn she heard a woman's voice whisper. Finally. Chapter 1. The first step was the hardest. Elissa's legs trembled as the king led her onto the dance floor, his hand warm and solid around hers, the first gentle touch she'd received in 5 years. The orchestra began without cue, a waltz that seemed to exist solely for this moment. His other hand settled at her waist with devastating care, as if she were something precious that might shatter. He moved like water, like wind, like something that had been dancing since the world was young. Elissa stumbled through the first few steps, hyper-aware of every eye tracking them, but his grip steadied her, guided her, made her look graceful when she felt like she was drowning. Your name, he said quietly. Not a question. A command softened by something that sounded almost like pleading. Elissa. Her voice cracked. Elissa Carrington, Your Majesty. His jaw tightened. Something flickered behind those golden eyes. Recognition, pain, something too complex to name. He stared at her face like he was seeing a ghost, and for a heartbeat, his hand trembled against her waist. The music ended too soon and too late. The king didn't release her. Instead, he turned to face the crowd, keeping her hand locked in his. This woman will remain at court as my honored guest. His voice carried to every corner. She will be afforded every courtesy, every protection, every respect due to someone under my personal care. His eyes found Lady Isabel, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Is that understood? Lady Isabel's mouth opened. Closed. Her face had gone white as bone. I said, is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty, Lady Isabel whispered, and it sounded like death. Within minutes, Elissa found herself swept away by palace attendants, escorted through marble corridors to chambers that belonged in fairy tales. Silk walls. A bed large enough for 5 people. Windows overlooking gardens that glowed silver in the moonlight. A young lady-in-waiting helped her out of the magical gown, which remained stubbornly real, and whispered, Forgive me, miss, but you look just like her. Like Lady Marigold. She gestured to a portrait above the fireplace. A woman with Elissa's face, Elissa's eyes, Elissa's smile stared back from the canvas. The resemblance wasn't just similar. It was impossible. Later, alone, Elissa stood at the window. The moonlight had faded to ordinary silver. The gown was just silk now. But she was still here. Still real. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered to the moon, to fate, to whatever had done this. What have you done to me? The moon offered no answer. Only silence, and the weight of a destiny she hadn't asked for. Chapter 2. Morning light revealed what moonlight had hidden. The palace was a shrine to the dead. Elissa discovered this wandering corridor she wasn't sure she was allowed in, drawn by something she couldn't name. The portrait gallery stretched 100 feet long, and every third painting was her. Except it wasn't. Lady Marigold at her coronation, crown gleaming. Marigold in the gardens, laughing. Marigold with her hand in the king's, their wedding day. Each one was Elissa's face worn by a ghost, and the resemblance made her skin crawl. Imposter, someone whispered as she passed. The moon goddess's blessing, another countered. Witch, hissed a third. Dark magic, mark my words. Reincarnation, an elderly woman breathed, making a warding sign. Elissa fled to her chambers and found her father waiting. Lord Carrington looked older than she remembered, his face haggard with an emotion she couldn't read. Joy. Terror. Elissa. He reached for her, then stopped, as if afraid she'd disappear. Your mother, Lenora, she was Marigold's lady-in-waiting. Her closest friend. They were inseparable. His voice broke. Lenora died bringing you into this world. 2 years later, Marigold was poisoned. I've spent 19 years trying to forget. And you? He stared at her face. You look exactly like her. Before Alyssa could process this, a servant summoned her to the king's study. She found him behind a massive desk, every inch the monarch. Cold. Distant. He discussed her accommodations like she was a diplomatic problem to be managed. You'll attend court functions as required. I understand, Your Majesty. She turned to leave, desperate to escape that clinical tone. Wait. She froze. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. You have her smile. It's unbearable. That afternoon, a letter arrived in Lady Isabel's elegant script. Enjoy your moment, stepdaughter. Borrowed crowns never stay on common heads. That evening, an invitation. The king requested her presence at dinner. Private dinner. Alyssa stared at the gilt-edged card and wondered which would kill her first, the conspiracy or the king himself. Chapter 3. The private dining room was intimate in a way that made Alyssa's throat tight. Just the two of them, a table set for royalty, and silence heavy enough to suffocate. Hagrid sat across from her in shirt sleeves, the first time she'd seen him without formal armor, and somehow that made him more dangerous, not less. Tell me about your life. Not a request. So she did. The truth spilled out like poison from a wound. 5 years of sleeping in servants' quarters, eating scraps, wearing rags. Her father's silence. Lady Isabel's calculated cruelty. The systematic erasure of everything she'd once been. His knuckles went white around his fork. No one will harm you here. The words came out barely controlled, vibrating with rage that made the candles flicker. Do you understand? No one. The intensity should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first safe thing she'd heard in years. He spoke haltingly about Marigold, their love, her wisdom, the agony of 45 years without her. They never found who poisoned her. Someone at this court murdered my mate and walks free. His voice broke on the last word. They reached for the wine glass at the same moment. Their fingers touched, and Alyssa's entire body went cold. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The instinct hit like lightning, moon goddess screaming through her veins. She knocked the glass away without thinking. It shattered against the floor, red wine spreading like blood. Guards burst through the door within seconds. Testing confirmed what Alyssa somehow already knew. Monkshood and silver extract. The same rare compound that killed Lady Marigold. Hagrid stared at the broken glass, then at Alyssa, his face transforming into something terrible and protective. You will have guards at all times. His hands were shaking. I will not lose you. The slip hung between them. Too much, too soon, too revealing. That night, Alyssa dreamed in someone else's memories. She saw the court through Marigold's eyes, tasted poison on Marigold's tongue, felt Marigold's heart stop, and heard Marigold's final thought. Come back. Finish this. Save him. Chapter 5. The restricted archives smelled of old paper and secrets that wanted to stay buried. Alyssa shouldn't have been there. The guards outside her chambers thought she was sleeping, but the dreams had become unbearable. Every night, Marigold's memories bleeding into her own, showing her fragments of a conspiracy 45 years old. She found the chest hidden behind false shelving, locked with a mechanism that opened to her touch as if it had been waiting. Inside, letters in elegant script, Lady Marigold's personal correspondence. The early ones were mundane, court gossip, complaints about tedious diplomatic functions. But the later entries grew darker. Someone is watching me. I feel eyes everywhere. Then, I suspect my inner circle. One of them covets what they cannot have. The final letter, never sent, made Alyssa's blood freeze. If I die, look to the Ashford-Elliot alliance. They covet power more than honor. They. The sentence ended mid-thought. 2 days later, Marigold had died. Elliot. Lady Isabel's maiden name. The conspiracy reached back generations. Lady Isabel's aunt had been part of the plot to murder Marigold. The current goal, position Cordelia as queen, Eliminate Alyssa, who threatened to expose everything. Alyssa took the evidence to Hagrid. He read in silence, his face carved from stone. These are dangerous accusations. Lord Ashford commands half the military nobility. You don't believe me. The words tasted like ash. I believe the evidence is compelling. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. But I was fooled before, Alyssa. Marigold trusted the wrong people, and it killed her. I need time to investigate properly. That night, she overheard him speaking to his advisor through the study door. What if I'm being played again? What if she's exactly what they claim? An elaborate trap. Alyssa pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Even he didn't trust her. She'd survived her stepfamily's cruelty, only to be destroyed by the one person she'd started to trust. Chapter 6. Lord Ashford made his move 3 days later, striding into the throne room with documents that looked official enough to condemn a saint. The full council was assembled. Alyssa hadn't known why until she saw their faces. This was a trial. Your Majesty, I present evidence of a conspiracy. Ashford's voice rang with righteous conviction. This girl is not what she appears. Her resemblance to Lady Marigold has been enhanced through dark magic. Her mother's connection to the late Queen was cover for infiltration, not friendship. He spread papers across the council table. Bank records showing payments to the Carrington family from unnamed sources. Testimony from servants claiming Alyssa's mother possessed forbidden knowledge. A letter, clearly forged, but expertly done, suggesting Lenora had been planted in Marigold's household specifically to gather intelligence. She's been groomed for this her entire life, Ashford continued, his eyes meeting Hagrid's with perfect sincerity. Planted here to manipulate you, Your Majesty. Just as they did before. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Alyssa. Hagrid's face was unreadable stone. Alyssa Carrington, you will answer these accusations. The formality cut deeper than any blade. She tried to defend herself, explained about the dreams, the moon goddess, the truth of what she'd found, but every word sounded desperate when framed by conspiracy. How could she prove divine intervention? How could she explain that her mother's loyalty was real when documents suggested otherwise? These are serious charges, Hagrid said, and his voice was the voice of a king, not the man who'd almost kissed her in the garden. Until we can verify the truth, I'm ordering you confined to your chambers. For your own protection. Protection. The word was a mockery. Guards escorted her like a criminal. Her door locked from the outside. Through her window, she watched Cordelia arrive for a formal court presentation, dressed like a bride. 3 days later, announcements appeared throughout the palace. His Majesty considers candidates for the honored position of royal consort. Alyssa pressed her forehead against the glass and felt the moonlight connection fading like a dying ember. Had she failed? Was this all for nothing? I survived my stepfamily's cruelty, she whispered to the empty room, only to be destroyed by the one person I trusted. The moon offered no comfort. Only silence, and the distant sound of wedding preparations. Chapter 7. 3 weeks passed like a slow death. Alyssa stopped counting days, stopped hoping. The guards changed shifts with mechanical precision. Food arrived on silver trays she barely touched. Through her window, she watched Cordelia glide through the gardens on Hagrid's arm, watched the court bow to her like she was already queen. The announcement came on parchment edged in gold. On the night of the blood moon, His Majesty will announce his chosen mate. Everyone knew who it would be. Cordelia had already started wearing Marigold's jewels. Lady Isabel visited that afternoon, her smile sharp as a knife. She dismissed the guards with aristocratic authority, closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a coffin ceiling. You were supposed to stay as servant, she said conversationally, perching on the window seat like a visiting friend. Invisible. Forgotten. Instead, you forced my hand by attracting his attention. She studied her nails. Did you know my aunt helped poison Marigold? The Queen discovered our family's embezzlement. Decades of skimming from crown resources. We couldn't let her expose us. Alyssa's blood turned to ice. You're confessing? Why not? You'll be dead within the week. Lady Isabel's smile widened. Tomorrow night, during the ceremony, Lord Ashford will offer the traditional blessing wine. Poisoned, of course. The same compound that killed Marigold. History repeating itself. And when the investigation begins, all evidence will point to you, the desperate imposter making one final attempt to secure power. They'll know it wasn't me. I'm locked in here. You'll have had an accomplice. One of your gods, perhaps, bribed with promises of wealth. We've already prepared his confession. Lady Isabel stood, smoothing her skirts. Enjoy your last night, stepdaughter. I've won. The door locked behind her with terrible finality. Alyssa sank to the floor, grief and rage warring in her chest. She'd lost everything. Her freedom, her father, the king's trust, even the moon goddess's favor. The moonlight that had once filled her with purpose now felt cold and distant. Then the blood moon began to rise. It came early, swelling over the eastern mountains like a wound in the sky. Not silver but crimson, massive and pulsing with power that made the palace stones tremble. The air grew thick with magic, ancient and overwhelming. Alyssa's chamber flooded with red-silver light. The temperature dropped until her breath came in clouds. And standing in the center of that impossible radiance was a woman who looked like Marigold but older, eternal, carved from moonlight itself. Alyssa Carrington. The moon goddess's voice resonated through reality like a bell. Do you know why you carry my mark? Alyssa could barely speak. No. Because you carry her. The goddess gestured, and Alyssa saw it, a fragment of Marigold's soul blazing like a star inside her own chest. Her dying wish was to return. To expose her killers. To save her mate from being deceived again. The goddess's eyes were infinite and merciless. You are both yourself and her echo. You are my chosen instrument of justice. I failed, Alyssa whispered. He doesn't believe me. He's going to marry. Then stop him. Power flooded into Alyssa like lightning into a lightning rod, burning through her veins, setting every nerve on fire. Break free. Speak truth. Justice must be served. Alyssa's eyes began glowing with silver-red moonlight. When she looked at the locked door, it exploded outward in splinters of ancient wood. Guards rushed toward her and stopped dead. She stood in the doorway wreathed in divine fire, her voice carrying harmonics that weren't entirely human. Move aside. The moon goddess commands it. They moved. Alyssa walked through the palace like vengeance incarnate, moonlight trailing behind her like wings, heading toward the grand hall where tomorrow would crown a murderer queen. Tonight, the truth would burn everything down. Chapter 8. The grand hall blazed with 1,000 candles, but they were nothing compared to the blood moon hanging in the sky like a crimson eye. Every noble in the kingdom had gathered, packed shoulder to shoulder in their finest silks, their faces turned toward the dais where destiny was being rewritten wrong. Hagrid stood beside the throne looking like a man attending his own execution. Hollow. Going through motions carved from duty rather than desire. His hand rested on the armrest with white-knuckled tension, and his eyes stared at nothing, seeing ghosts. Cordelia stood beside him in a wedding gown of white silk and gold thread, triumphant as a conqueror. Lady Isabel watched from the front row, her smile cold as winter frost. And Lord Ashford approached the dais carrying a crystal goblet filled with wine that gleamed like blood in the moonlight. The traditional blessing, Ashford announced, his voice carrying to every corner. As our ancestors drank, so shall our king and his chosen mate drink, binding their souls before the moon goddess. The same ritual. The same poison. History repeating itself with surgical precision. Hagrid reached for the goblet. The doors exploded inward with a sound like thunder splitting stone. Alyssa stood in the shattered doorway wreathed in silver-red fire, moonlight trailing behind her like wings of divine wrath. Her eyes blazed with power that made every wolf in the hall drop to their knees in instinctive submission. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that weren't entirely human. Marigold's voice layered over her own, two souls speaking as one. "Stop. In the name of the moon goddess, I command this ceremony halt." The court froze. Candles flickered. The blood moon's light intensified until the hall looked drenched in blood and starlight. Alyssa walked forward, and reality bent around her. Guards rushed to intercept and were thrown back by invisible force, their weapons clattering uselessly across marble. Nobles pressed against walls, terror and awe warring on their faces. She reached the dais and pointed at Lord Ashford. 45 years ago, you and the Elliot family conspired to murder Lady Marigold Bearclaw. She discovered your embezzlement, your theft from the crown, your systematic looting of territories under your protection. Ashford's face went white. This is absurd. Silence. The word cracked like lightning. Alyssa gestured at the wine goblet, and it shattered in Ashford's hands. The liquid hit the floor and burned through marble like acid, leaving scorched stone where it touched. Monkshood and silver extract. The same poison you used before. She turned to the court, and ancient letters appeared in the air around her, glowing with moonlight. Marigold's correspondence, magnified for all to see. Payment records. Testimony from servants bought and silenced. Decades of conspiracy laid bare. The Ashford-Elliot alliance, Alyssa continued, her voice resonating with divine authority. They murdered a queen to protect their crimes. And now they sought to repeat history. Poison the king, frame me as the desperate impostor, and crown their puppet to ensure their secrets died with me. Hagrid stared not at Alyssa but at the evidence floating before him, at the faces of nobles he'd trusted for decades, now exposed as architects of his greatest grief. Lord Ashford tried to run. Alyssa touched his forehead with one finger, and his guilt manifested visibly, shadow pouring from his skin like smoke, taking the shape of every crime, every murder, every lie. He collapsed to his knees, and words spilled from his mouth compelled by power he couldn't resist. Yes, we killed her. She was going to expose us, ruin us. We had no choice. We planned everything, waited 45 years for another chance. His confession dissolved into sobs. Lady Isabel bolted for the exit. Moonlight solidified into chains of pure light, binding her in place as she screamed. The court erupted into chaos. But Alyssa stood at the center of it all, divine instrument of justice, finally speaking the truth that had waited 45 years to be heard. Chapter 9. Guards dragged the conspirators away in chains, Lord Ashford still sobbing his confession, Lady Isabel screaming threats that dissolved into pleas, nobles who'd hidden the truth for decades suddenly desperate to cooperate. The court erupted into chaos, decades of carefully constructed lies unraveling in real time. Through it all, Hagrid stood frozen, staring at Alyssa as the divine power began to fade from her skin. The moonlight dimmed. The otherworldly harmonics left her voice. She became just herself again. Exhausted, trembling, barely able to stand. He crossed the distance between them and dropped to his knees. An Alpha-King, kneeling before the entire court. "Forgive me." His voice cracked. "I let fear and old wounds blind me to truth. I betrayed you when you deserved my faith." Tears streaked his face, the first time she'd seen him cry. "You are the bravest person I've ever known. You survived cruelty I couldn't protect you from, and still came back to save me." He looked up at her with something like worship. "The moment you walked into that festival, something in my soul recognized you. Marigold told me before she died that she would return when the moon called and the kingdom needed her most." His hands trembled. "I've waited 45 years for you." Alyssa's knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest as the last of the divine power drained away, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion. She woke in chambers she recognized. His chambers. Dawn light filtered through windows, painting everything gold and soft. The blood moon had set, its crimson power fading to memory. Hagrid sat beside her bed, still in his ceremonial clothes, looking like he hadn't moved in hours. When he saw her eyes open, relief transformed his face. "Am I myself or her?" Alyssa whispered. The question that had haunted her since the beginning. "What do you want to be?" She thought about it, really thought. The weight of Marigold's memories, the echo of her soul, the destiny that had brought her here. But underneath all of it, something purely her own. Something that had survived 5 years of cruelty and still chose compassion in a storm-soaked forest. "I carry her essence, but I'm not her replacement. I'm Alyssa." She met his eyes. "And I choose to love you as myself." For the first time in the entire story, Hagrid smiled. Not the controlled expression of a king, but real joy that made him look decades younger. Then as the blood moon witnesses, "I choose you. Not as an echo of the past, but as my future." The formal mate bonding happened at sunset, under the fading light of the blood moon's last rays. The court gathered in the courtyard below, witnesses this time to truth rather than conspiracy. Alyssa stood on the balcony in a gown of midnight blue, Hagrid's hands solid and warm in hers, and for the first time in 5 years felt like she belonged somewhere. In the crowd, her father wept with joy. Her stepfamily watched from prison windows, their reign of cruelty finally ended. "Thank you," Alyssa whispered to the moon as it set. A voice whispered back, gentle as starlight, "You were always worthy. You just needed to believe it." Epilogue. 6 months later, the throne room blazed with light and celebration. Alyssa knelt before the High Priestess as the Luna Queen's crown, silver wrought with moonstones that caught the light like captured starlight, was lifted high for all to witness. "By the grace of the Moon Goddess and the will of the people," the priestess intoned, "I crown you Alyssa Bearclaw, Luna Queen of the Northern Territories." The crown settled onto her head, cool and surprisingly heavy. The court erupted in cheers. Hagrid stood beside the throne, pride and love written across his face. Her father wept openly in the front row. Everything she'd survived, the cruelty, the exile, the conspiracy, had led to this moment of impossible triumph. Then the vision hit. Shadows gathering in the east like storm clouds made of malice. An army that moved wrong, commanded by something that shouldn't exist. And at its center, a darkness that made the conspirators' plot look like children playing at schemes. The same force that had corrupted nobles 45 years ago, the same ancient evil that had murdered Marigold the first time, not just for embezzlement, but for something far more terrible. The Moon Goddess's voice whispered through her mind, no longer gentle. "The first battle is won, daughter. But the war for this kingdom is just beginning. What killed Marigold was merely a symptom. The disease still festers in the dark." The vision faded. Alyssa swayed, and Hagrid's hand steadied her instantly. His eyes met hers. He'd felt it too, through their mate bond. The question hung between them, unspoken but understood. "Together," Alyssa whispered. His smile was fierce, feral, all wolf. "Always." Far to the east, in mountains where even moonlight feared to reach, a figure stood watching the distant palace celebrations through a scrying glass. Their face was hidden by shadows that moved with unnatural life, but their voice carried the weight of ancient grudges and patient hatred. "Enjoy your crown, little queen. You've won a single battle." Darkness coiled around them like living smoke. "But the true war hasn't even begun. And this time, I'll make sure neither you nor your mate survives to see another dawn." The scrying glass shattered. In the darkness, something that had waited centuries began to move.
And that is where we leave Alyssa and Hagrid, crowned, bonded, and facing a threat that makes the conspiracy look like child's play. But here's the thing, if you want to know what ancient evil is rising in the east, if you want to see Alyssa embrace her full power as Luna Queen, and if you need to know whether that shadowy figure gets what's coming to them, you've got to let me know right now. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready for part 2. Smash the like button if you're absolutely living for this story. And drop a comment below telling me, first, where are you watching from? And second, what do you think that darkness in the east actually is? A demon? An ancient wolf god? Something even worse? Your comments fuel these stories and I read every single one. So subscribe, like, comment your theories, and I'll see you in the next chapter of Alyssa's journey. Because trust me, the war for this kingdom? It's only just beginning and you do not want to miss what comes next.